And the thing you need to be good at as a manager is if you're going to hire someone onto your team, then you have to be okay with giving them some level of autonomy because you think that like if you've hired them, you think that this person is good. If you hire that person on the team and then you spend most of your time questioning the work they do and needing updates every couple of hours on what they're doing, then you've either hired the wrong person or you as a manager really need to figure out how to be okay with giving more autonomy to people on your team.
Hello 2020 and welcome to this year's first episode of Outside the Valley, the podcast where we interview remote startup leaders, remote work advocates, and thought leaders who thrive outside of Silicon Valley. These people will share insight on what works and what doesn't, so you can learn to do it right. Outside the Valley is brought to you by ARC, the remote hiring platform that helps you to hire remote software engineers and teams easily. And I'm your host, Jovian Gautama. For our very first episode in 2020, we have Kieran Flanagan, the VP of Marketing at HubSpot and the host of the amazing growth marketing podcast, Growth TLDR. Now, in this episode, Kieran talked about how remote work has helped him in his career and his life in general, why he thinks career opportunities should not be limited by geographical location, and one of the hardest parts of being a leader of a distributed team. Kieran also shared his insights on why remote hiring or hire remotely is one of the best things that you can do for your company growth, how you can avoid too many processes in distributed teams, and the so-called goldfish face problem in remote meetings. Now, this is our first episode in 2020, and I promise you we will have more great guests coming on and share more insights, knowledge, and experience about leading remote teams and remote work in general. So, if you're enjoying the podcast, please do consider leaving a review on iTunes. You can go to your iTunes or Apple Podcasts and then search for Outside the Valley. Leave 5 stars if you like the show, and if you have any comments or feedback, please email me at jovian@arc.dev. It's Jovian, Jovian, @arc.tv. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at arc.dev. Now, without further ado, let's go to our conversation with Kieran Flanagan. Here we go. Hey, Kieran, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be on.
Yes, awesome. So, Kieran, just like I mentioned before the call, I'm super excited to talk to you today because you are one of the few people in the marketing field, digital marketing and growth marketing field that is super passionate about remote work. So just to start a bit, can we go through a quick history about your career and about your digital marketing career or growth marketing career and how you end up in HubSpot?
Yeah, so my background is actually in computer science. So I was a software engineer, was not very good at being a software engineer. I transitioned to become a marketer because my brain is just better. Although when I first went into marketing, I really did a combination of like development and marketing. So I started in search, which is can be a very technical role. And so did that for some amount of time and then got into SaaS through working for Salesforce. Went to work at Salesforce, Marketo, fast forward to HubSpot. And I've done 3 things in HubSpot, which has helped to grow the international business and then changed roles within HubSpot to help to grow our freemium business. And then today, all of the teams, I manage the group of teams that generate HubSpot's demand across the globe, helps to generate all of the customers.
And how long have you been working remotely? Is it since the even before HubSpot?
No, so like I guess one good thing is because I've been thinking a lot about I talk a lot about remote, write about remote, post about remote. And one thing I would say is what I'm more passionate about in the way I think about my role and the role of other people I work with is like distributed teams. And so what I mean by distributed is because when people think remote, they always think, hey, someone's sitting in their house and working from their home. And
Yeah.
actually the thing that I am passionate about is like, that can be part of a distributed team, but actually
Mhm.
teams who can be either in offices across the globe or fully remote. And so
Right.
when you expand and your company and start to build sub offices, that you can have groups of people across those offices who are all in the same team, or they could be fully remote at home. So for me, I've kind of been, when I joined HubSpot's freemium group to grow out the marketing and growth engine for our freemium business, I was hired, I changed roles to do that. I was meant to move to Boston, could not move to Boston for personal reasons. And they said, okay, well, try to make it work from Dublin, knowing that most of my group is going to be based in the States.
I see.
And so I was the only person in Dublin. At that time, there was I had a team of like 5. It was very small because we had just started freemium. And 4 of them were in the US. I was in Dublin, and we kept on growing that to about 25 or 30 people. And about 3 of us were in Dublin. Everyone else was in the States or other places. And then today there's about 55 to 60 people in my group, and about 5 or 6 of them are in the same in the Dublin office. Everyone else is spread out across the States, Berlin, France. And so the way I kind of structure my week is I usually spend about 3 days at home, and I come into the Dublin office for 2 days.
Got it. Yeah. It resonates so I've talked to Andres Klinger, the head of remote at AngelList, and he actually had a similar viewpoint as you mentioned. Basically, sees remote work as more of a spectrum. It doesn't have to be like 100% distributed. It doesn't have to be like 100% co-located, but there's that area in between. We actually at ARC is also like hybrid team. So I think that's kind of a popular term nowadays. So most of us are co-located, and some of us are, based in the other countries in the United States or Mexico or Canada. Going back to about you, I read this article where you mentioned a couple of times, I forget it's a couple of times or once, that remote work had helped you so much. Can you share a bit more, like how, having this flexibility and working in the remote settings helped you? It can be, career-wise or personal-wise.
Yeah, so I will try to. I'm trying to build like a little framework for this. So this may not come out right because I've only just thought of it in the bath last week, and I haven't like articulated it or
shower thoughts
yet.
Yeah,
shower thoughts. So I was trying to help my people in my group and some other people outside of my group that I try to help on like how they should think about career. Right, and if you think about your career, there's 4 pillars to your career, which is basically your own ability, which most people think it's like all based upon their own ability, and it's actually not. It's like some amount your own ability, some amount your ability to choose the right company to work for. A large part of your growth is actually dependent upon the person you work for, like directly your manager. Actually.
I agree.
And then there's some amount of luck, which people don't like to talk about, but it's true. Because if I have really great ability, but I picked the wrong company and have a bad manager, it doesn't really matter what I do, I'm stuck. If I have really great ability, I pick the right manager, but the company stagnates, right, doesn't grow, then I'm stuck because my manager is not going to move up, I'm not going to move up, and I don't have more opportunities. So there's the luck in that the company starts to grow, your manager is a really great manager, so they have other opportunities and they can take you with them. And then, so that's 4 pillars, but traditionally there's been 5, and the other big one has been location.
I see. Yeah.
And you have all of these great people that can do great work, but for one reason or the other, they can't move to San Francisco, Boston, New York, London, Berlin, or wherever the other like that's primarily the biggest kind of cities for tech. There's others in other industries and maybe other cities. And so what I love about remote work is that I hate the fact that location has to be such a big component of what makes someone successful. You should be able to be based in a city of your choice because you want to be close to your family, or you have a partner that can't move, or you have someone within your family who's sick and you want to be near them. Or in my case, I couldn't move for a personal reason, and I couldn't go to Boston. So in another world where remote work was not possible, or HubSpot were not a good enough company that they would allow me to try to build something really great from Dublin, even though all of my team and the core company is based in the States, then I could not have done the freemium role. And the freemium role for me was a huge opportunity, had a big impact on my career. I feel I'm a way better leader because of that role. And that's what I love about remote work, because it helps to reduce the reliance on opportunity for you to have a really great and successful career.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. It's actually the same premise that we have on ARC, right? As a software, remote software hiring platform, we actually have the same idea. It's, we have these great software developers from around the world. They can be based in Asia, they can be based in Africa or Europe. And they are super skillful and almost like this so-called Silicon Valley talent skillful, right? And I just like you mentioned, like the fifth pillars, like we don't think it's fair that they are only restricted by the regional limitations of that, because
Right.
for the other pillars, like in terms of ability, well, probably on luck they are not the same, but in terms of ability, knowledge, they are able to go out there. So I want to move on a bit to remote leadership. So Kieran, you've been the VP of marketing at HubSpot for how long again?
Since 2016. Yeah, the start of 2016. Before that, I was helping HubSpot to build out. So I was kind of like heading up international marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So for just about 2.5 years, I kind of helped to build out the international markets, and so did some amount of remote work, but actually most of my team were based in the office in Dublin with me.
Got it. So I wanted to ask this question. I think a lot of people has different answers. But in your own opinion, why is leading a remote team especially hard? I know you've talked a couple time with other remote leaders like Kevin Lee from Buffer, or even Nicholas Holland from your own company. But for you personally, why do you think the one thing or two things that make leading a remote team especially hard?
Yeah, the hardest part is relationships. Actually, like if you're a leader, one of the core things to be a great leader is to care about your team beyond metrics, right? So if you are just hey, these are people and these people make my numbers go up or down, and that's how I look at these people, then that shines through, and it's not a great way to lead a team. And so you do want to care. You don't need to like go visit everyone in your team's house every single night, have dinner with them, but there needs to be some amount of empathy for the things that go on in those people's lives, understanding a little bit about them beyond just the thing they're accountable to in work, which means basically just like you have to want to have a relationship beyond just the metrics or the things you're accountable to. The thing that's really difficult with remote is building relationships over Zoom. It's actually really hard, right? Like we as humans still connect best when we are in person. And there's just no amount of awesome technology or online collaboration tools can take away the fact that we are like primarily people who like to build relationships with other people that are in the same place as us, and we can kind of connect with. And so that's why you see most of the best remote companies all have retreats. So they have these like quarterly retreats or retreats where everyone can get together and they can actually get to know each other, spend some time with each other. And so a big part of being a remote leader, I think, is definitely traveling to the places where your employees are. If you're a fully kind of distributed team in that you have no offices and you are all over the globe, then you're not going to go and visit everyone's house. So you are relying on like these retreats. But I think that's the thing. I think one of the people that I talked to about this, and you just mentioned, was Nicholas Holland, who had some really great insights in this and calls that collecting gold coins, and you store up all these gold coins in your bank when you're building relationships with people. And that's how he sees his time with his team, is like he collects those gold coins, which is like all of that stuff, all of the good stuff in terms of building those relationships. And then you can use that throughout the next period of time where people are just connecting with each other over Zoom.
Yeah, and by the way, we'll put the interviews that I mentioned just now on the show notes, so everyone can check it out. So since you've been a remote leader for a while now, have you ever had the situation that you feel like one of your team members, oh, this person are, let me think how to phrase this. He or she is somehow quote unquote not used to work remotely, like need more guidance in communication. My question is, have you ever had that situation, or the HubSpot or you usually are able to mitigate this on the interview process?
So we try not to distinguish between like being a good communicator if you're remote versus being a good communicator within office, in that if you're within office or remote, we expect you to be good at communication. And
Makes sense.
dependent upon, there's a ton of different things that go into that. Like that's if you're a person that is very comfortable doing the role that you're doing, and you are what you really need is someone to remove blockers for you and just make sure that you're going down the correct path. Your communication style is very different from someone who's come into something, is doing something quite new and needs a lot of help to get up to speed on the thing they're accountable to. And then your communication style needs to be more proactive and asking a bunch of questions. So I don't think we've ever had a case where we're like, I've certainly never personally had a case where I'm like looking at this person's communication style and thinking, oh, well, this is this is the reason this is going wrong is because they're remote. It's more I try to focus on like their communication style, agnostic of being remote or in office, and how we can help them to communicate it in a way that's going to make them more successful. I do think when you're remote, there are some things that do matter. And I know Wade Foster from Zapier has talked about this a lot. I do agree with him, which is you do have to be, there is some amount of like, there is some amount of accountability on you to be proactive. And I've always thought that, and actually Nicholas, again, who maybe is a good person to get on your show at some point, countered me and didn't agree with that. He's like, some people, if they're remote, needs to be proactive. Other people don't, if they just know their shit and don't need help. But I think I think what really matters in terms of what we mean by being proactive is it's easy to kind of forget there's other people like on your team and just like get into a place where you're not reaching out for help when you need to because you can't visibly see them. And then the other thing I kind of do agree with is like you do need to be good at written communication, because what you'll in a remote team, you're documenting a lot more things. A lot of your back and forth is through Slack, comments, and docs. And so you don't need to be, the best writer in the world, but you need to have a good communication style via write-in. And even so, we create a lot of videos through an app called Loom. Yeah. So there's, getting good at those kind of tools does matter.
Yeah. You mentioned that in our article, I actually need to just take all of these articles and put it on the show notes. You mentioned that team structure will have more impact on growth than any marketing tactic. I totally agree with this. I'll give you an anecdote about my team for a while. So my coworker, Paul, he's in Canada. So he's joining us for like a year or two right now. And on the interview, I asked him, like, why are you interested in this hiring space, right? And he gave me an answer I will never forget, because I found it interesting, because I'll never look at it that way. Because basically any problems that you have in your company, you can solve it by hiring, by having direct people. Doesn't mean it's going to be cheap, right? So, right. But that's kind of like almost on the ideal way, it's all cure for everything, assuming you're hiring right. And your quote here also remind me of that. It actually, when it comes to growth team, I like that you also think it's about team structure will have more impact on growth. My question would be, can you elaborate more on this, for any examples or anecdotes from HubSpot that you feel the team structure or having remotely impact the growth directly?
Yeah, I think when at a company of any size, there's two important things beyond all of the marketing tactics, sales tactic, customer success support. So you touched on the first one, which is how do I hire talent, right? And there's a lot of things that can go into that. That's a whole other podcast. But when you've got the talent, it doesn't mean that they're guaranteed to be successful. You can hire talented people, and because you have set them up in an incorrect way and have not set them up for success, then those people are going to fail. And then that's going to just be a secular thing where you're like, oh, well, we'll just hire another person because it's obviously a talent thing. And it's actually because you've set these people up in your team structure in an incorrect way. And so on the growth side of things, that gets exasperated because when we're going into this kind of product-led model, when we have these growth setups, for the most part, there's like cross-functional teams there's teams that have to work cross-functionally that have traditionally not had to work so closely. Right. And so a good example for that is like in a lot of product-led companies, freemium businesses, you have product, marketing, sales, engineering, all kind of owning go-to-market. And so these teams are trying to figure out, who owns what? How do we work together? And a lot of time gets wasted in reporting structure, right? I own this, but what tends to happen is you have these people and teams who own metrics. And when you actually ask them, how do you hold yourself accountable to that metric? What are the things you can do to shift that number? They're reliant on these other teams who have a totally different metric, a totally different North Star. And so there's just friction because I'm asking the product team to do something for me. They have a totally different metric and are motivated by something different. The product team are asking marketing to create some stuff for them. They are motivated by a different metric that's way down their priorities. And so one of the most impactful things you can do is say, okay, if we are going to be successful over the next 3, 6, 12 months, and your timeline is really dependent upon the company size you are. Smaller companies have a shorter timeline. Larger companies will have a larger timeline. But let's say I'm thinking, how do I be successful for the next 6 months? And I place the things that I need to do to be successful across those 6 months. And I think about who are the people that are accountable for this. And I have a collection of people, generally cross-functional and growth. And they're the people best placed to move this metric. And I ask myself, okay, do these people fully own this metric? Or are they reliant on other teams who are motivated by other things? And you try to solve those problems. And what you end up with is a pod of people call them pods, squads, whatever you want to call them, around a metric. And that team are fully accountable to that metric. They are not reliant on the other teams. So then you can hold them directly accountable and say, hey, are you hitting your number? If not, why not? And the answer they give you will not be, well, this person won't do this for me. This person won't do this for me. I can't do this because this person isn't going to do this for me. Their answer should be, oh, well, we thought this would work. This experiment would work, and they're not working like we thought we would. And you can actually try to start to solve those things. And that's why I'm a huge, huge advocate for team structure, cross-team alignment, and making sure that you have the correct accountability being a massive growth lever beyond all the kind of tactics, experiments, hacks you can run.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I heard about the concept of squats before, but I think this is the first time I've heard it being explained so thoroughly. Like you mentioned, like you need to figure out the metrics of each squat and try to figure out how do you, from there, try to figure out how do you work with them and how do you structure the process around it. Amazing. So in the remote teams, and still related to team structure, right? Having a process is important. But in one of your articles, you also wrote that it's possible to create an excessive number of process, like the management FOMO kind of thing. How can we find a balance between this too much or too little, just the right amount of balance in managing distributed or remote teams?
Yeah, I don't think there's a perfect answer to that because it's so kind of contextual based on how things work. I think the thing that you can, you want to have a very clear system of operation without making that system of operation the core part of someone's job. And so like in a growth team, the core, like one of their core things of operation is documenting experiments beforehand, and then documenting the results in a central repository that other people can kind of learn from. Now there's like lots of other things that go on, but there's just certain processes that certain teams need to have. If we kind of pull on that thread a little bit, the reason where a lot of teams over document things, become too process driven, and I'm actually a big believer in processes, super important, but why some teams become overly indexed in processes is because you have a manager or you have someone who's in charge of something and they don't trust their team, right? They're trying to make that team document everything, send them everything, because they just don't trust that they're doing the things that they want them to do, or that they just have a problem with letting go of responsibility. And the thing you need to be good at as a manager is, if you're going to hire someone onto your team, then you have to be okay with giving them some level of autonomy, because you think that they're, like, if you've hired them, you think that this person is good. If you hire that person on the team and then you spend most of your time questioning the work they do and needing updates every couple of hours on what they're doing, then you've either hired the wrong person, or you as a manager really need to figure out how to be okay with giving more autonomy to people on your team.
I think the best practice, try to have a really good hiring process up front, just to avoid this kind of problems like in the middle, because when it's there, it's really hard to figure, especially when you're remote. Like,
right.
You cannot just sit down with people on the same room. You also wrote about the goldfish face. I found it really hilarious. I'll let you explain this about it. So what is the goldfish face?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that remote work is really good for is to teach people how to communicate better, regardless of if you're in a remote role or you go into office. And I think one of the great things about spending some time remote is, even if you decide to work in an office because that's the best environment for you, you'll actually be a better communicator for having to work with people who are remote.
True.
And so the remote fish face is basically, if you try to think about this in two different worlds. In a remote world, what that is like when you are in a team, and there's a group of people in an office, and then you are a couple of people remote. What tends to be happening is you're like a goldfish, constantly open and closing your mouth, because you're trying to get into the conversation, and everyone is having the conversation in the room, and they're not paying attention to the screens. They're just in the zone, like they're chatting, they're getting some things done, and they completely forget to like acknowledge the fact that there's people remote who are trying to participate in that meeting. Mm-hmm. And if you think about that, that actually happens in the real world, regardless of being remote, because you actually have people who just have dominate conversations, because just of their communication style, it's very like domineering.
Dominant, right?
Yeah. They're very dominant and within the room. And then you have other people who are not like that, but are just as intelligent, have just as good as ideas, but they're naturally just not, that's not their communication style. And what we traditionally do is we just allow that to happen within a meeting, and the people have very dominant communication styles overrun that meeting, and they leave thinking it's a great meeting. Everyone who kind of gravitates towards that communication style, they even think it's a great meeting. And then you have a small group of people who are trying to participate and feel like very undervalued.
Yeah.
And what remote teaches you is to try to, like, again, if you're a manager or you're holding a meeting, if you're the person who instigated the meeting, then part of your role is to be a facilitator, right? Part of your role is to say, hey, would you like to, do you have a thought there? Do you have a question? Any ideas? Trying to get all people involved in the discussion. And I think one of the things that remote work can help do is help make you more empathetic to different communication styles, because they just become so much more visible because they're on a big screen, and you can clearly see that these people are struggling to get into the conversation.
Yeah, I agree. So I talked to the Help Scouts VP of Engineering, Megan Chinberg, a while ago. It's funny that she mentioned that remote work actually made her a better person, because the exact same thing that you mentioned, like you care about the other parties more, and okay, do you feel heard or something like that, and it kind of like transpires to her daily life. But I want to add on that though, I think the goldfish face can be cured when it comes to like serious meeting. But I think one thing that is really hard is on a fun setting. Like a couple of times I tried to crack a joke with some of them are co-located and some of them are on Zoom. And then the goldfish face happened, like, oh, what just happened? Now, this is really hard because if I repeat the joke, then it's not funny. So right. I think that's where the retreat comes in play, right? This is where you...
right, they get to know your personality, they get to spend some time with you. The other thing is, like, here's an interesting question for you, because you obviously work remotely with people who are based remote. When people are presenting, does everyone on the call mute their mic?
That's actually a good question. We actually struggled with that a bit a while ago. So we do that now. So whenever someone's presenting and everyone will be on Zoom. And then even though like 5 people in the same room, like 1 people remote, right? And the 5 people will open up their camera and then just pretend that we are all in the different places. But
Yep.
it's still tricky because, you know, when in Zoom, if 5 people in the same place, okay, whose mic should be on now? So it's kind of awkward.
And so that's the typical, like we would have always said, hey, you need to mute your mic, and it's good practice to mute your mic. And that's basically what everyone who is talking about remote work, that's the advice they will give. There's an opposing view to that I have, which is, how horrible is it to present to people with their mics off? Because to your point on the joke side of things, right, you're trying to make a joke, it's hard setting, and everyone is just like stone-faced because they haven't heard you properly, they don't know you that well, maybe they haven't spent time with you. How bad is it when you're presenting to like 10 people and 9 of them have their mics off, and you're trying to do a presentation, have some fun stuff in there? You can hear no feedback at all because everyone has muted their mic, and they're doing the right thing because they don't want to interrupt someone. But it's not a you know, it's a very alien environment to have present to people who have this complete silence, or not even like you going, oh yeah, that's a good idea, or giving you any kind of like little nudges of like encouragement. And so you have to really be thoughtful about those things. I think you should mute your mic if you're in a noisy location, but for the most part, I actually prefer people I've started to prefer my team and group unmute themselves, so we can give people who are presenting some like noises of encouragement, laugh to their jokes if there's jokes in the presentation. And so I think there's just like all those nuances when you're remote that you have to kind of think about.
So in terms of communication procedure between remote teams, right?
Yep.
Some teams, they prefer to work asynchronously, which means ideally you don't need to have any meetings or overlap. You use app like Twist or a Basecamp or that optimize instead of Slack. But like for companies like Balsamic, for example, they have this golden hour where ideally most of the company like 1 hour where they just synchronously and they just have meetings.
So we have there's just a variety of different things because there's so many people. We have periods of time where people overlap and have meetings. We definitely have meetings. There's like definitely people in my group who are very anti-meetings, and I have to force them to have meetings sometimes. But we do a bunch of different things, to be honest. We work depending on where people are based. They can have very little time where they overlap, so they're using Airtable and different tools to plan out projects and leaving each other messages. But I think every group, for the most part, will have some period of time where they there's overlapping hours where they can kind of work together, have some meetings, have some real life chat. It's really hard to. I've talked to people who've been in this position. I was in it for a little bit at a previous company when I was Dublin, and that company was West Coast. I think it's really hard to be productive if you have no hours that overlap with each other. Or it makes work a lot more complicated if you have no periods of time that overlap with each other and everything is being done opposite. And you have your day at work, you do your stuff, and then you hand that on to the next person, and they're trying to pick it up. I think that can be a little bit tricky.
Yeah. The next level on that is our situation where most of them are North America and Asia. Like almost, if you go with the East Coast, like 12 hours different.
Right.
That's so tricky. So that's like next level shit. So, okay, so let's go to the team culture thing. Any particular things that you do or HubSpot do to maintain and improve the culture for remote teams? Both fun stuff, serious stuff.
So maybe I'm not the most fun because I don't always know all of the things that are going on for remote employees. They have we have like specific Slack channels where you can hang out and talk about talk about the latest TV shows, talk about anything you want that's outside of work, like trying to recreate that water cooler feel where you're talking about the latest show or the latest sports game or something. And so
and who initiate this conversation? Is there some kind of like people ops, or it's mostly like the group leader?
I think it's a variety, but we have a really great people ops team that are very invested in remote work and are
That's awesome.
Consistently trying to make the environment and culture better for remote workers. And I think they do an incredible job. And so they set up a lot of these things. They're very thoughtful about how to ensure that remote workers feel like an inclusive environment for people who work remotely. So we have kind of all the things you would typically see in a distributed company, where we have those fun Slack channels. We have the Donut app that allows you to, everyone uses that app. Teams do their own thing. Teams also do their own things. Like, to be honest with you, like one of my teams that's fully remote, like I was on my first ever baby shower I attended for one of my team members, and everyone was remote, and they do coffee, like remote coffees, remote lunches. There's always things going on across the different teams. So we have a people ops team that are very thoughtful about how to build a good culture for remote employees. And then the remote managers and leaders are very, very thoughtful about how to build a really great environment for their team and team members who are remote, because we just see it as such an important part of our future growth.
That's amazing. So I think there is some, I saw on Twitter the other day, there's this notion saying that like in the future, there'll be a title called the VP of Remote or something like that. That's basically just help, working on the process for remote teams, the culture and whatnot. Who knows?
I think there could be someone, it depends, like, who knows what new made up titles there will be. But I think primarily in companies, your people ops team or the team who are accountable to culture, it's part of how they build the culture.
Mm-hmm. True. So I want to move on the hiring process a little bit. So we do need to touch all of them, but I know as a remote leader, when you're hiring, you put a lot of emphasis on this particular hire to having a self-starter characteristic, right? Just curious, like when on the interview process, what kind of questions or what kind of project that you kind of use to evaluate if this person is a self-starter or not?
Yeah, just to be maybe to come back to that, because I don't know if I was overly clear. I think that being a self-starter helps you both in office and remote. I think it. Remote. Yeah. Remote. I think I more talked about proactive around communication, and that remote sometimes you can get into your bubble and forget that you have a team there that can help you. Mm-hmm. That's just like learning that you need to be cool at reaching out to people in Slack, setting up meetings in Zoom. We do not like go, hey, how does, we don't have a set of characteristics that are remote, a set of characteristics that are in office. So we don't look to see if this person like is a self-starter and remote, and then we don't care that they're not a self-starter if they're in the office. So we don't really distinguish between someone we're hiring remote and someone we're hiring in the office. We look for, is this person going to be great at their role? Like all the different things that we want to have in someone who works within HubSpot. And then we don't really give too much thought to like, you're going to be remote or in office. I think it's really, it helps if you've had some experience remote, just because if you haven't worked remote before, it can just be it'd be a difficult transition for you. You only have to work in office. But we don't like overly distinguish between those two things.
So basically, it seems like, let's say, no matter in HubSpot, right? No matter if you're remote or non-remote, you're basically just looking for someone that is just proactive and just to be good at their role. Right? Is there any particular stage in your hiring process? It can be for the growth and marketing that you kind of evaluate how proactive this person is. So I'll give you an example for our company. When we're hiring a new engineer, there is this take-home project, right? And we also evaluate like what questions did they ask on the private Slack channel, stuff like that. Do you have like similar process?
Yeah, we again, each department, each role, each team will have its own ways to tease these things out. But things that we do are, we have certain roles. We have exercises that you can bring home, and then you can see the amount of work that someone has added to that exercise and how proactive they've been to get some of that information. We don't want you spending weeks on doing something that's part of an interview process. Yeah. But we do want to it does matter that you've kind of been proactive and really done a good job there. We will ask a good question to ask in terms of discovering someone how proactive they are is like, tell me the last problem you had to solve within your company and how did you go about solving that? And you can see how many layers deep they went in trying to discover what that problem was versus like, oh, I just handed it off to an engineer versus, oh, I read these 3 blog posts, discovered this thing, then went to this person and then figured this thing out. And then like you can kind of like start to tease that out. So we try to for the most part test for all of the characteristics that would make you successful in a role.
All right.
It's not just being proactive, it's like across a wide spectrum of different things.
Fantastic. So let's say I am a company that kind of want to start hiring remotely. It can be for growth roles, marketing roles, probably just because time zone issues. For example, if you're based in Europe and want to hire some marketing role or sales role in the US, and let's say this is my first time hiring a remote team member who are not in my office. What things do you think I should figure out first and foremost before I go about hiring someone abroad?
Yeah, I think, their success for the most part is largely dependent upon you and the people in the office versus them. What I mean with that is like, obviously some of their success is still dependent upon them. Mm-hmm. But if you're employee number one, there's only so much you can do to integrate yourself into the team and the culture and the company. Most of it is dependent upon the team, the culture, and the company. Mm-hmm. And so you want to make sure that you're committed to having a really great experience for whoever you hire, which means like even trying to think of some of those things, which is, hey, when we have a team-wide meeting with this person, are we all going to be on Zoom or a bunch of us going to be in the office and that person is the only person in Zoom? Do we just making sure that you have some principles to make sure that you've created a good experience for anyone who works remote with your team, within the company. That's the things I would focus on. And then you can kind of go out and make sure when we hire this person, their success is not going to be inhibited or they're not going to fail in the role because we haven't set up the right environment for them to be successful.
Yeah, I love that answer because I have this hypothesis that actually if you are a co-located company and going remote is actually will force you to get your shit together in terms of internal processes, documentation, and whatnot. Because before you're probably kind of messy, scrappy entrepreneur, like 10, 20 team company where everyone knows where we are now and everyone just, messages on Slack or just verbally. But when you hire remotely, it kind of push you to get your things together, the culture and then how to documentation and whatnot. So I really love your answer on that. Since you are on the VP of on the marketing team, right? I think a lot of times when you're in marketing, especially with great companies like HubSpot, a lot of times where you can just need to be creative, like something out of left field, something that's never been done before. How do you guys go about finding or brainstorming creative ideas?
So I don't think I have a great answer because a lot of our best ideas have just come from people having ideas and then running small minimal viable tests and trying to figure out if they're correct or not. A lot of our best ideas come from customer research. Most of them come from customer research. I think staying close to your customers are where your best ideas come from. And then a lot of it just comes from like understanding the segment and the audience that you are trying to attract attention from. And so every team has like their own way to approach how they come up with these creative ideas. For me, it's more about what you do after you have the idea. That's the important thing. I think we all have Airtables and Trellos and different documentations with countless amount of ideas. Mm-hmm. The thing is how you turn an idea into a minimal viable version of that idea so you can get some amount of feedback before you invest too much effort and resources in it.
Yeah, just because I think it's kind of true to the HubSpot culture, as I know, customer centric. You guys even have this service hub, right? For working with customer success and trying to talk customers and whatnot. So I think our time is almost up there. I won't take your time more. So Kieran, how can people find you online?
So at Twitter, On Twitter handle SearchBrat. On LinkedIn, you can connect with me and you can listen along to the Growth TLDR podcast if interested.
Yeah, so I'll recommend everyone to listen to Kieran's podcast at Growth TLDR, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you work at the growth team or marketing team. It's super amazing. And yeah, have a listen. So Kieran, thank you so much for your time today. I learned a lot. Fantastic conversation. Right.
Yep.
Well,
thanks, Ian.
Thank you. And that's it for another episode of Outside the Valley, brought to you by ARC. We created this podcast with the hope that in each episode, you can learn something new from other remote startup people. So if you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at jovian@arc.dev. It's JOVIAN at arc.dev. Or you can find us on Twitter at arc.dev. See you next week with another episode of Outside the Valley, and ciao.